Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 154 of the Best Games Period. I'm your host, Jack Gardner, and with me this week is Jordan Black. Hello, welcome.
Hi there. Hi, Jack. How you doing?
I'm actually having a pretty good day. I got a full 9 hours of sleep last night at a decent time. And then I woke up and I've basically just been working and kicking butt and taking names today, and it's felt real good.
Yeah, awesome. I've been having a fairly productive week myself. Can't say the same for hours of sleep, but been making some good headway.
Yeah, the sleep was definitely not the norm for me this week. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I'm glad you're doing well. Can you tell us a little bit more about you and what you do? You're from Just Add Monsters, and tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I have been working pretty much in the industry for about 6 years now, and around this time last year, I came on board Just Add Monsters, or I helped create Just Add Monsters with my local news station, KHQ Spokane, which is Spokane's NBC affiliate. And since then, we've really just been building out our content slate with review content, video essays, critiques, and recently we actually expanded our staff, brought on a new person. We're now 13 episodes into our podcast. We had a really good episode this last week. And we've just been kind of doing the same, kicking butt and taking names. We've started recently expanding into more investigative, slow-paced content. So we're taking a little bit of a break in our uploads, as opposed to uploading something every day or every other day. But I think it's really going to pay off soon. And then aside from that, I also do some minor independent game work on the side.
Nice. Can you tell us anything about the investigative work you've been doing, or the game you're working on?
Yeah, I can. So as far as investigative work, I am doing I want to keep it a surprise for now on what the game is, but it's been a whole lot of just, I guess the crux of what we want the series to grow into is a post-mortem look at games that didn't really take off, or games that didn't really continue a series or start a series like they were anticipated to, but from the point of view of the production team, the game designers, the people who worked on it during development. So it's been a lot of tracking down and finding people who have either left the industry or left the company they were working at. A lot of LinkedIn. Turns out LinkedIn is good for something. And it's been, the game in question is about 13 years old now, so it's been a lot of people going I don't know, I'll answer to the best of my ability. But we've had some really promising answers so far, and I'm excited to finish up the piece and be able to show people just kind of a more, I don't want to go too heavy into the nostalgia angle of it, but just a look at, we get a lot of critiques of older games. We get a lot of, looking back at the halcyon days of Deus Ex, or you'll read a PC Gamer article talking about how Halo 1 was really the pinnacle of gaming. But I'd like to kind of dig into the perspectives of the people who make the games a little bit more, and see how they remember the process, what fond memories they have, how the industry has changed, that kind of thing.
So I know you don't want to say the game, but can you tell us if it's a prominent game, or is this kind of taking the angle of what was developing a mid-tier game back then?
It's not, I wouldn't call it mid-tier. It was AAA, but it wasn't a mainstream huge hit. The thing that kind of makes this an interesting case study as we're going into a new console generation is that the first game in this series, because there were two games, the first game in the series was a Xbox 360 launch title, and then the second game came a couple years later, and it hit with its own multiplayer mode and everything, but it hit right in the middle of, I want to say Grand Theft Auto 4 came out a month after it, like Rock Band 2 or 3 came out within a month of it. And it was right in the midst of Call of Duty 4 and Halo 3 and all that other stuff. So kind of also taking into account the climate at the time.
Right. Interesting. Okay. And I was also going to ask, like, how interested were people in talking to you about this? Because I know one of the big things, like, when it comes to, like, talking about older games, like, finding the actual people who worked on it and, like, who are willing to talk about things like that in detail it's difficult.
Yeah, it's mostly... So I had to sign up for LinkedIn, like, their premium service where you can message anybody.
Oh, no, you got suckered into it.
Yeah, well, and the problem is, game production teams, even back then, you're looking at, like, maybe 60, 70 people, nowhere near as big as some of the AAA games today. But they will limit how many messages you can send, so it's like, okay, I'm just going to put this on the company card. But it's basically been a matter of copy-pasting the same, hey, I'm putting together an investigative piece on the development of this game, would you be interested in talking about it? And sometimes people don't get back to me, I'm assuming because they don't ever look at their LinkedIn, and who could blame them? And sometimes they get back to me, and they're like, oh, wow. A lot of times it's mostly surprise that people are like, oh, I haven't thought about that in a really long time, or I didn't know people still cared about that. But I'm making a bet that people will care about it once they hear about it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been pretty good and pretty just overall positive. One of the reasons I kind of want to pick things that are a decade or older is that I feel like, if there's a big controversy around a game like Aliens Colonial Marines or, even well-received games or stuff like that, it gets dug into by Polygon and Kotaku and Jason Schreier and the whole group that generally goes after those stories. So there's not much there to really uncover or talk about. And, I think there is a lot of opportunity in uncovering those stories in the games that might not be as infamous.
Yeah, and I think there's also, like, a lot of coloring of the narrative that goes into the public perception of a game when those types of stories come out. So maybe that extra time, like that 10-year gap, can really let things cool down, and you can re-examine something in a new light if it did have that. I don't want to say hysteria, but that's kind of what a lot of things around games end up turning into.
Yeah, and I've been, just because these videos, I can already tell, I've been working on this for 2 weeks, and it's a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of written email Q&As with the developers.
Mm-hmm.
So I can tell that these are going to be time investments, and I do think it'll pay off, but I've already kind of started the wheels turning on the next couple games I want to cover and reaching out to some other developers. And that also entails, I want to capture footage of the games, and so I've been going back and revisiting them and playing them. And there was one that I've played, and I was like, this game was, kind of either critically panned or middle of the road reviews when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
But playing it now, especially in contrast to any other AAA game, and it was a AAA game at the time, again, like it was really trying to push boundaries. It just strikes me how weird and experimental a lot of games at the beginning of the 360 generation were, especially when developers were really, really trying in the wake of like Half-Life 2 to start implementing physics engines and different kinds of interacting systems into gameplay dynamically. So yeah, it's neat to take a look back at some games that, because there's always going to be games that weren't necessarily ambitious or weren't that good and are not really worth talking about. But I think it's more interesting to look at games that were ambitious and failed
Mm-hmm.
than to just write them off as like, this, if that game sucked, or to just continually re-examine the same popular old games that were ambitious enough but still accessible enough to gather more attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to talk about, obviously the games that succeeded and why they succeeded, but I think one of the more overlooked aspects of the game industry is talking about, ambitious games that failed and why that happened, because oftentimes the stories behind those failures is way more interesting than people might think.
Yeah, and the other kind of half of it, one of the feelings I just get from developers when I'm talking to them about some of these games is really just a surprise on some of the more negatively received games when I reach out to them, because it gets lost in the critical sphere and in the hype cycle, but games take thousands of hours of work and years of people's hard work and time to create. So these are, in a lot of ways, moments of their life, and I can't imagine what it would be like to put time into a game like that and just have it, written away on bad critical reviews or have a studio shut down or something. But
Yeah.
even those games, I know people. I have a soft spot in my heart for some games that maybe aren't great, but I have a lot of nostalgia for them, and I know there are other people out there who feel the same way.
Exactly. Like classics like Overblood, I've talked about on this podcast
Oh yeah,
before, or I had a couple guests on a while back to talk about Illbleed.
fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah, there is definitely like a spot in video games for kind of enjoying those ambitious and flawed, often hilariously flawed games.
well, and it's weird because as Last of Us and Ghost of Tsushima have been coming out and really taking up a lot of the air in the room, and I look at them and I play them, and they're incredibly polished, but almost to a dull edge, where you can't go too far off of any given path. The physics engines aren't going to screw you over in any weird way. And I actually just got done playing Halo 3, completely unrelated to the release on PC. I've just been playing through Halo games, and there are so many, and it's still an amazing game, but there are so many just weird rough edges, like physics engine glitches that will just send you flying off the stage, or you can just accidentally run into something wrong, and something will send a box flying at your head, and the physics engine will just detect that it's going to kill you, and it does. It just weird stuff like that. And games just they aren't flawed in that way anymore. And I find some of those flaws so much more charming and more interesting because of how they happen dynamically, as opposed to being just these very, I don't want to say stuffy, but on rails, not on rails. Never mind. Sorry.
No, I get what you're saying. There is a kind of sterile feeling to it. Like there aren't the rough edges in like.
Sterile is the perfect. Yeah, that's exactly the word I was looking for.
Yeah, like I can't say too much about it, but I've been playing a game for a mock review, and one of the things, like it's obviously still in development. It's has a lot of things that are wrong with it, but there is real heart and charm in it that comes through despite all of the flaws that it has. And I think that I don't think it's necessarily as dire as you were saying. Like I think that there's definitely still not at like high tier game development anymore, but like mid and lower tier, in terms of how many resources projects are getting.
Yeah.
Like with a Ghost of Tsushima, for example, like they're throwing tens of millions of dollars at it to make sure that it does not have those issues.
Yeah. And I don't want to make it sound like I think that's all games are anymore, but it does, like you were saying, the more money they throw at a project, the more of those edges are going to be doled down to make it palatable to a wide audience, which is fine. Every industry needs its blockbusters, but I think before we had figured out all of those sanding methods, I think some of the blockbusters were a little bit more interesting, or might just be a little bit more interesting to revisit.
That's true. I mean, like, who knows how we might feel in 10 years about the blockbusters of today, but yeah, there's definitely, like, when our modern blockbusters are coming out, and I'm not sure, like, this is something that makes, like, looking at older game development processes interesting, but like when Ubisoft releases a game, you know that it's been tested by like rooms of executives who are trying to make sure it's as marketable as possible and as, you know, safe and not edgy and not engaging in controversial, you know, politically charged statements and all of that. So I think stuff like that ultimately makes a game less interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
yeah.
you've been playing Ghosts of Tsushima. What else have you've been into?
I've been playing a lot of stuff lately. I've mostly been I need to play Deadly Premonition 2 because we're going to be doing a review and a spoiler cast on that. But for some reason I just got sucked into a Halo hole and haven't been able to escape because the Master Chief Collection, which I have on Xbox, and I probably play through all the Halo games like once a year. Like I get a vibe and I need to get it worked out. And they put Halo Reach on there, and I just haven't played it.
You play through all of the Halo games?
Yep.
That's a lot of Halo games.
Yeah, no, and well, that's what I'm saying. Like it's like an infection, really, and it's the Master Chief Collection doesn't make it easier because they have like 700 different trophies and achievements you can go for, and I'm the kind of guy that will sit down and be like, okay, I kind of just want to play it, but I don't really have any reason. Well, I'll just start a heroic campaign and I can get the heroic campaign achievement, and then it's like, okay, well I beat Halo 2, but it ended on a cliffhanger, so I should probably see what happens in Halo 3, even though I played all these games before.
Yeah, you want to experience the complete narrative arc.
Yeah, and there are some kind of neat things that they've changed with the Master Chief Collection, like they've the legendary ending for Halo 3, which shows Chief and Cortana being in the Forward Unto Dawn and getting in the pod that he wakes up in Halo 4, so you can just kind of like go right from that to Halo 4, and it's this very cool, seamless upgrade. And then on top of it, they just have like maybe one of the best, now that they've worked out a lot of the kinks with it, one of the best multiplayer suites I've ever seen. Like, it is so... They did the smartest thing I could imagine in just letting you, from the main multiplayer menu, check boxes for what modes you'd be interested in and what game multiplayers you'd be interested in. So if you just want to play like goofy modes on Halo 2 and 4, it'll just match you into those. But if you want to play like SWAT or snipers or anything on all the maps, you can really customize your experience so that it never stops feeding you a completely unique multiplayer game. It's astounding, really. Like I can play for hours and still never have even remotely the same multiplayer experience. And just because of the breadth of the series and how long it's been around and how much they've changed, there's nothing else. There's no other game on the market that can really offer that.
Yeah, I mean, like, especially when it comes to modes, I guess. Like, I know, like, Battle Royale stuff is all the rage now. And that seems to be enough, like, of a ever-churning pot of new things that people aren't getting bored. But the fact that like Halo 4 has had such longevity is really impressive.
Well, it's been, the weirder part about it is that they've started to add new cosmetics. So,
oh, is it turning into like modern TF2?
No, not quite. There's kind of like a free battle pass type thing where they just actually started this with Halo Reach, because Halo Reach had a ton of customization options. So they kind of hid them behind incremental, like, multiplayer checkpoints.
Mm-hmm.
And then they started Season 2, which is all Halo Combat Evolved stuff. So
Interesting.
Which didn't have, like, the only personalization options in that game was what color you wanted your guy to be in Deathmatch. And so they've added, like, you can now change visor color, you can now unlock different weapon skins, different vehicle skins. I just got a Warthog skin that makes it look like one of the Jeeps from Jurassic Park.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, like, really, it's really strange seeing this, like, 20-year-old, almost 20-year-old game at this point, whose multiplayer I've been, playing off and on. I'm not like like I said, I have, like, real phases where I'm fixated on Halo, and then I'll go the rest of the year without playing it. But I've been playing it off and on, like, all throughout my life. So seeing, like, new content that's not a mod, that's not fan-made, is really bizarre.
Yeah, it's definitely a departure.
But it's cool that they're doing that stuff. Like, they've, a couple years ago when Master Chief Collection came out in, like, 2014, 2015, whatever it was, people were pissed. Like, it was an absolute mess. Everybody hated it. The multiplayer didn't work. There were tons of bugs and glitches, but they've just kept working on it and refining it to this. It's an amazing package. Like, I wouldn't regret having bought an Xbox for it, honestly.
Wow. Okay. Hot take.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've mostly been playing a game I can't talk about, and I've also been playing RimWorld. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am not. Tell me about it.
It's basically a PC, like, survival / base building game. It's like, it takes place top down, and there's not really, like, a concrete goal. Like, there are ways you can win, quote unquote, but, like, the main focus of the game is basically, like, kind of experiencing your own story as you kind of live with this colony and, like, these people who join your cause, and like you engaging with the other surrounding communities that you find yourself next to, and dealing with, like, aliens like alien bugs that attack from underground, or discovering ancient machinery that comes alive and tries to kill you. It's a lot of fun. And maybe fun isn't exactly the right word, but, like, it sucks up a lot of my time. Yeah. And I don't feel like I wasted it, I guess, is kind of the thing. I enjoy the little stories that kind of emerge, like one of the colonists on my in this community that I've built has an aversion to, like, mechanical parts, and he lost an arm, and so, like, he now has a mechanical arm that he kind of just lives and loathes. Or, like, there's another one who when he gets stressed, he runs around and starts fires. And I have, like, I built, like, an entire, like, mausoleum to like house, like, the pets of people, like, that have died in the community, that were, like, named and, like, bonded with different colonists. Yeah, it's fun to just kind of imagine, like, this alternate society.
Yeah, that sounds neat. It sounds like there might be a random aspect to it, like maybe a little bit of roguelike thrown in there.
Yeah, definitely. Like, when you start out a new game, you can actually choose what type of AI you want running, like, the roguelikeness of the game. Like, you can have a balanced one, you can have, like, a madman that will just occasionally just throw everything at you. You can have, absolutely passive. Like, it really just depends.
Awesome.
Yeah. And did you say you played Ghosts of Tsushima?
I played Last of Us 2. I've been mulling over if I'm going to play Ghosts of Tsushima. I just don't have the time for that discourse right now.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. I really want to ask what people think about it, because it's definitely one of the games that I feel most conflicted about, and I find it fascinating in that regard. Like,
yeah, and I'm like every other, you know, person in I love a good samurai movie. I love me some Kurosawa. I have like most of Kurosawa's Criterion Collection films on my shelf at home. Like I'm a big film school nerd, so it's like duh, yeah, I love that stuff. But on the other hand, the things I'm hearing from Japanese critics who I really trust on how it kind of glorifies nationalism and imperialism and perpetuates a lot of the more negative aspects of how samurai stories are told, especially in the West, have me just I think I'll just wait for like a sale or something.
yeah, I'm kind of fascinated because I read that Famitsu gave it like a perfect score, which has only happened like to a Western game like 3 times ever. So I'm really curious to hear more from like some of my Japanese friends to get their takes on it, because definitely feels like this game should be more controversial than it has been up to this point in like the general discourse, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like just Last of Us sucked so much of everybody's discourse energy out of the room, and then people are just trying to hibernate and gathered their discourse power for Cyberpunk. So,
oh, when is that coming out?
I think it's like November or something.
Oh my gosh, that's too soon.
Yeah.
I actually was surprised that Ghost of Tsushima like came out like was last week, this week.
Yeah.
My sense of time is terrible.
I think it's tonight. It actually drops.
Yeah, I'm. This seems like a year for controversial games. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like we all have anything better to do than argue online over video games.
I mean, that's true. Maybe, you know what? Maybe that's an intentional service.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Better to do that than,
cry.
Be out on the streets and go to bars and party and all that.
Yeah, assuming your bars are open to party at.
That is true. That is true.
All right. Well, we were kind of touching on it earlier, but like games with rough edges, there are a few that really match that as well as Deadly Premonition, developed by Swery, who I don't know. Do you want to talk a bit about Swery first?
Yeah,
I feel like having a foundational understanding of him is like important to understanding a lot of his work.
Yeah, I feel like Swery is, he's an eccentric Japanese game developer, I would say, and not to say that they're similar at all, but I put him in the same mental category as like Suda, or maybe Hideki Kamiya, or
Yoko Taro, maybe.
Yoko Taro, like, definitely. And I think all those guys, like, Suda and Swery are friends, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're also friends with Yoko Taro. And he is that same kind of eccentric director where you also get a lot of his personality in interviews and social media. Like, he's a very outgoing, outspoken person. And by all accounts, I think Swery is a really good creator. I think I think Deadly Premonition kind of got a bad rap for a while as just being like, it's like Twin Peaks, but the video game.
Although, how is that a bad rap when you think about it?
And I think, well, I think it's partially because there were like 3 games that people were calling that when that game came out. It was like that, Alan Wake, and then there was a really weird moment where like Heavy Rain and Deadly Premonition were being conflated because they're both like murder mysteries.
Oh.
Yeah, which is I hope I didn't just like invent that in my mind palace, because I have very distinct memories of that being a like argument online. But yeah, Swery I think he's a really good writer. He's been working in the industry for a long time. I actually have one of the first games he worked on as like a scenario writer for PS2, Extermination, which, fun fact, that's actually the first horror survival game that was available on PS2.
I think I actually have that too.
Yeah, and I didn't even know it was a sweary joint until I was playing it one day, and there's a bar in there called Sweary 65, and I sure enough went and looked in the manual. He was on it. Then he did Spy Fiction, which is a very much I think I would call Spy Fiction more of a Metal Gear parody than a like ripoff.
I don't think a whole lot of people have played Spy Fiction though. Like,
no,
it seems like no one talks about it when they're talking about him anymore.
It's yeah, I think that would actually be a neat one to bring back at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, he started development on a game that was, I think the working title was Rainy Woods, and that eventually, it did start development on PlayStation 2, and eventually just morphed over to Xbox 360 and became Deadly Premonition, which I think was the first big... I think it was a couple, like a confluence of things that allowed it to blow up. Part of it was just the time and place for the internet. 2011, you're looking at kind of the dawn of the Let's Play sphere. Giant Bomb, their endurance run of the game, helped it get a big profile. And then it was still a time when a lot of game reviews were still, and a lot of outlets, outlets that aren't even around anymore, like 1UP, were still very prominent. So I think it was Jim Sterling who gave the game a 10 out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were, some reviews gave it like 0 or 1 out of 10 or whatever. So having that kind of dichotomy of review and then also just these spotlights on it really helped to get it and him a little bit bigger of an audience. And then he's kind of just been bouncing from project to project ever since.
Yeah, so basically Deadly Premonition came out, and like you said, it didn't really make a huge splash. It's kind of like in a way it's kind of comparable to like Demon's Souls, or Demon's Soul. I always forget where the S's are in that one. But where it came out, and then just kind of like, there were some critics who were like, this is like one of the greatest things ever. You have to play it. And just like over time, like sales did not do well, and then over time, like it kind of just wound up becoming a cult classic. Like, and for good reason. There's like nothing really comparable to Deadly Premonition out there. Like nothing really plays like it. Nothing like there's no story that has the weird cadence it has. Especially not back then, not when it came out.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the time that it came out, it was a time of like Assassin's Creed and Assassin's Creed 2 especially, that open world formula really starting to blow up. And a lot of other major AAA games were first-person shooters trying their damnedest to take the Call of Duty crown, which, like, dog, that thing's been around for almost 20 years now, still undefeated. Like, if only we could show sales figures for, like, Call of Duty 15 to the developers who were working on, like, Homefront. I'd really like to go back in time and do that and just be like, guys, you got to make your game different. But if you look at really everything that came out around it, it was a game that was so unique and different in what it was doing and its approach to horror and storytelling, and also just the world design. And I think as people really played through it and got deep into what it had to offer, that depth really just shines through.
Yeah, it's... I don't even really know where to go with this discussion, because like that depth is definitely a key, but so much of the depth isn't necessarily like doesn't have necessarily like a direct tie into the narrative. It's just kind of there to allow you to experience, I guess, get more invested in the world, even if it's in like kind of bizarre ways.
I think of it as kind of and I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if he was, but I think of it as taking a lot of influence from the Yakuza games, where there are a lot of different side activities. There are a lot of different side quests you can kind of stumble on, and some of which have really strange triggers, so you will literally just be going about your day doing something normally, and you'll get a side quest dropped in your lap. And they're also, it's very playful about the rules of a video game. So in the same way that in Yakuza you can get like a weapon that is just a giant swordfish that you can hold in your pocket and still have like this really engrossing story, but then when it comes time to fight, you pull a swordfish out of your pocket. In that same way, there are side quests in Deadly Premonition that end with you like getting an infinite ammo flamethrower or a chainsaw that you can hold like a sword. So there are these kind of playing it fast and loose with the rules of reality, but as long as they're able to putting the emphasis on sinking the emotional value and the time needed into characters, into developing those characters, developing the world and the story, so that it all meshes together in a really cohesive way, so that you don't even realize how invested you're getting in every individual part.
Right. And I think another thing that kind of separates it from a lot of games that were released at the time, and even since, is kind of the cinematic influences. Like a lot of, and it wears those on its sleeve. And while like I'm not necessarily sure that like the main narrative holds up to those influences, it's definitely structured differently and from most games, and more along the lines of like maybe a mini series or a movie. And I think it has a lot of the writing chops to back it up, even if that writing is often delivered in very bizarre ways.
Yeah, the writing itself it can be stilted. The voice acting ranges from like solid to just not great, and part of that is animation, and there's a lot that goes into making a character or a performance in a game believable. And I think if you compare something like Deadly Premonition to something like The Last of Us, where you have these meticulously organized scenes and these just incredibly high fidelity character models and mocap like you've never seen before, and professional actors like giving it their all, and then you have something like Deadly Premonition where it's we're going to have a cutscene that's the camera kind of pulled back while these two kind of stilted PlayStation 2 refugee Xbox 360 puppets just kind of wiggle around and talk to each other while the movements that they're making and the gesticulating that they're doing doesn't quite match up to the tone of what they're saying, but after a while you kind of go with it.
Well, and like there's also an argument to be made that like, and I think Swery is like an intelligent human being. Like, he knew he was working on a shoestring budget for this game, and instead of letting that hold him back from telling this story, he used those limitations to kind of heighten a lot of that, because like it is alienating watching these like PS2 era models, like almost like two dolls in like a kid's action figure set or something, like talking to each other. But the very fact that it is alienating is kind of part of the point for a lot of the interactions in the game.
Yeah, and he makes it work, and I think it's another one of those things where you kind of have to pick your battles in game development, and if you don't have all the money in the world, okay, you can see that in Deadly Premonition, because there are scenes that they do take a lot of time to really animate and get a lot of the camera angles down, and whether it's to establish stakes or tension or shock or what have you. Like, there are those moments, and they sell them really well, but it's that kind of understanding that, like, if the player's just having a conversation, we don't need to go all out. Just put a camera here, have them say the lines, and let's move on.
Well, so I know one of the things that wasn't great at the time and probably has not aged super well is the combat, and really like the sections that a lot of people would consider like survival horror. What do you think about those parts of the game?
So I actually don't mind them, and I think it's one of those things where, because I'm a horror guy. I come from a big horror background. I worked at Rely on Horror for years. So when I play something like Deadly Premonition and the buttons work most of the time, and you press a button, it swings something, the hit detection isn't terrible. It's kind of a refreshing change of pace if you've played a lot of PlayStation 2 horror games. It's not great. Obviously, you can look at gameplay of it. It's kind of a Resident Evil 4 knockoff with a little bit of melee combat thrown in, but it works. It gets the job done. The enemy variety is never too intimidating. It's completely fine. It's serviceable. I find it as a kind of metatextual way of presenting to the player like the way York's mental processes work and the literal battles that he is fighting to piece together what's happening. I find it more interesting as a way to analyze kind of what's going on there in the story. Mm-hmm. But I think it's ultimately like completely serviceable.
Yeah, I think describing it as like a Resident Evil 4 knockoff is probably the most accurate way of describing it, just because, especially when it comes to like QuickTime events.
Oh, yeah.
Which plagued Resident Evil 4. They're also like one of my least favorite parts of Deadly Premonition. And I think for me, like I don't find the combat refreshing at all, but I do appreciate, again, kind of that alienation that I was talking about earlier. It extends to like how the game controls and the combat, and it's less so that it's scary for me, or ever was scary for me, and more so just the like what the fuck of it. Like, because a lot of the like maybe we can like walk through how the game opens, and like a lot of this stuff seems to come out of nowhere, and especially if you're playing the game for the first time, the game is like trying to jar you with its sudden twists and turns in tone.
It's a lot to take in, and honestly, one of my favorite gaming memories is the first time I played it, because it was, and I actually just recounted this on our podcast a little while ago, but it was, I think, my birthday in like 2010 or 2011, so I want to say it was the summer between 8th grade and freshman year of high school, and I had a friend over for a sleepover, just going to play some games all night, like kids do. And we were at GameStop, and I had a little bit of birthday cash, and this game I had never seen before, Deadly Premonition. The cover just caught my eye, because it's the cover art is just rad. And to just kind of quickly describe the cover art, it looks like a screaming person with bloody bandages. It's just really striking, and as a horror fan who I love Silent Hill, even back then I loved Resident Evil, and I saw it was just $20, and I was like, we gotta like check this out, because my friend was a Silent Hill fan as well. And so we get home, and we wait for it to get late before we pop in the horror game, and it's just a lot. It's just a lot to take in from square one. The intro.
I'm just trying to imagine little Jordan like, oh yeah, this is like a horror game, and the content you get compared to what you might think from the cover is very different.
Just immediately out of the gate with the bizarre soundtrack and the way it goes, and we played a little bit and turned it off or whatever. I remember we opened up the menu, because the menu is this big, like, interior shot of it's meant to be like York's kind of mental reprieve, like the inside of his mind. And
yeah,
it's
his little mind palace.
Yeah, it's just this bizarre area with like this Evil Dead deer on the wall, and this table. There's a table with cookies and a gun and bandages, and there's a book full of trading cards. And I think we were just crying laughing, because at this point we had kind of resigned ourselves to be like, oh, this game is dumb, it's stupid. Look at this goofy shit. And we put it away for the night, and then I came back to it later. And I really just over that summer went back to it and kept playing it more and more, and just fell in love with it, because I'd never played anything like it that had been engrossing in that way. And once you really see past the rough edges, and there are many a rough edge to that game, it's still absolutely worth playing. And I think some of those rough edges almost give it a timelessness, where it was rough to play when it came out, but still very playable. Like I said, the hit detection works, the controls are serviceable, like everything works fine. It feels like playing a dated game now as much as it did then. Whereas some games that were newer then are like kind of harder to go back to because of the way they rely on, whatever fads were in development at the time. But I think it's still, like, in weird ways, holds up.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the kind of game you couldn't set out and make again today, even if you wanted to. Like, I feel like we're kind of seeing that with Deadly Premonition 2. Like, a lot. I think, like, the effort to make a game that looks and feels the same as Deadly Premonition did is a lot harder to go back to, because, like, our baseline technology is just better now.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's definitely a part of me that like, you see the reviews coming out about all of the frame rate and everything like that, and there's part of me that's like, I mean, that it's Deadly Premonition.
Yeah.
Like, technical glitches like that are kind of to be expected, but I'm not sure, like, having not played it, I throw my hands up and just plead ignorance. I'm just saying, like, as an outside observer and someone who's played the first one, it's kind of what I expected from a sequel.
Well, and it has been, as I've been playing, because I just haven't been, like I said, I got sucked into a Halo hole, and so I just haven't been, like, going back to Deadly Premonition 2 as much as I thought I would be. And it has been, it's a completely different game. Props to the design team. They went in there is still open world stuff, and there is still, you can definitely see how it's a sequel, but it's not at all trying to retread old glory, I guess. It's not trying to recapture that lightning in a bottle. And I think from what I hear, I'll just spend more time with it and try and fall in love in the same way. I just need to really power through it. I think it was the same thing for me, and Death Stranding is another one I haven't gone back to. I need to just buckle down, find a good weekend, and just play through it.
Yeah. So what do you think about kind of what have come to be considered, like, the controversial elements of Deadly Premonition?
So I think the big controversy around Deadly Premonition for a lot of people is the way it treats what is ostensibly its kind of trans representation in Thomas, who, if I'm remembering correctly, doesn't ever get a proper name. She's not named anything other than Thomas in the game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I think it goes back to what you're saying with his kind of cinematic inspirations, where I always saw that as an homage to Psycho.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Psycho has some really problematic stuff now.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Like, looking back at it, it's like, geez. But it's one of those things where I don't think anything should really be off limits in fiction. But I think it's hard to toe a line between that and being considerate to how that kind of thing actually works. And
yeah,
so,
like it'd be one thing if like there wasn't an entire trope of trans people being like
psychotic
killers.
Yeah, like, and I think that's where it comes apart for me, because she is actually depicted as a very sympathetic character. Like, she is manipulated and physically and emotionally manipulated and abused by the kind of big antagonist of the game. And at the end, she is depicted in a kind of Elysium-ish, heaven-y scenario with all the other women who had died, which I think in a way kind of insinuates that she does find happiness as a woman. Now, the problem there is that, it's the old bury your gays trope, which sucks.
Now, so question and clarifying, I guess, to get more input, because I guess I was under the impression that Thomas was a cross-dresser, which would be distinct from a trans woman.
Yeah, and that's kind of the other thing, is that it never... Like, the reveals towards the end of that game happen so fast that very few of them have time to really unpack or register.
Mm-hmm.
And for like the BDSM purposes of what's going on in the story there, Thomas is a crossdresser, but for a lot of the narrative stuff, including that kind of scene that you see at the end and the way she's depicted in pictures and stuff you see with all the other victims,
it's kind of implied.
It's very... There's a heavy implication. And then there are other problems around that with his kind of... the movements that he makes as a character being very, let's say, exaggerated, just in a kind of stereotypically gay man way.
Yeah, and I guess I want to take a moment to say that I don't think Swery intends any ill will towards trans people. I think his later games have kind of definitely clarified that. Especially Deadly Premonition 2 recently got called out for the way it treats its trans character. And he responded by saying essentially immediately, that he was going to rewrite all of those scenes and apologizing profusely.
Which is, like, and I pointed this out on Twitter, which is wild. Like, I've
never seen anything like that.
I've never seen, like... God forbid a major AAA company make a bold artistic statement or whatever, and then be like, actually this didn't work, or we misread the room, or we didn't understand what we were doing. But for somebody who doesn't even... He's not a native English speaker. He works out of Japan. The office, everything is in Japan, but he's listening to the Western audience who love and play his games, and trying to react on that front. And, like, it really... I get where people are kind of miffed that, okay, well, after The Missing, why didn't he have somebody on board as, like, a consultant to try and, navigate this type of thing and put it in the right place before the game comes out? And I do understand that. I think it might be a case of him working on too many projects at once. He was working on Deadly Premonition 2 concurrently with The Good Life. Concurrently with whatever he's doing with Suda, with Hotel Barcelona. So it's like the man's busy, and I get that. And I think it might have just been one of those cases of overlooking something. Because from what I hear, the trans rep in DP2 is rugged.
Yeah, and just for people who might not be aware, like I haven't played the game, I've seen some of the scenes in question. Basically, the main character, Agent York, goes on a long spiel relatively early in the game about trans rights and how important they are, and like how trans people are people and, you know, deserving of human rights and respect and all of that. And then periodically throughout the game, he will then like dead name a trans woman to her face, or like get like be in private and like gender her correctly and then correct himself to gender her incorrectly. It's very strange.
Well,
but
and
I'm glad it's getting fixed.
What I think they were trying to do, and I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen the scenes, and from what I gather about where the story goes, I think it was trying to be like an identity situation, or a split personality type thing.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that is that also reinforces some really bad tropes. And I'm not inherently against that. I think that could actually be pulled off well in a particular context, but this isn't the way to do it. Especially when
this is not that context.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mess, and like you said, it is disappointing given some of his other output, particularly The Missing, which is a game that I really adored that game, and I know that it's a game that has actually meant a lot to trans people.
I will point out that he didn't write The Missing.
Yeah.
He executive produced it, so that's probably where some of the disconnect comes.
Yep.
But I do believe that he has his heart in the right place when it comes to trans people. Especially going back to Deadly Premonition 1, which came out in 2010. Like, I know 10 years isn't like a long time relative to a lot of things, but in terms of how far like trans rights have come in 10 years,
yeah,
it's pretty far. Like, I know that when like in 2010, I didn't even really know what transgender meant, and now I have boobs. So like it's a thing, and I don't hold it against people for like being ignorant, especially if it was like 10 years ago. And like in Deadly Premonition 2, like Swery's done enough where I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on a lot of things, where I wouldn't necessarily maybe give the benefit of the doubt to other people in the same circumstances, I guess.
Yeah, like if it was a David Cage game that came out and handled something this similarly.
You've just caused the monkey paw to curl a finger. You realize that.
It's inevitable at this point that he's going to do something stupid like that.
You said it, and it just made me realize that's probably going to be like the nature of his next game.
Yeah.
He's already done robot racial apartheid. Where's he going to go next? It's got to be trans people.
And
right?
I think that would be like a good analog to like somebody who very obviously doesn't get the problems with his own work and doesn't apologize for them and just doesn't seem to see any critique versus Swear. It's like the kind of the incel and Chad meme, like the loner David Cage versus the Chad Swery.
Yeah, I mean it's the two flip sides of auteur, really.
Yeah, somebody who like very much just takes their criticism to heart and is like, oh, I did not want to offend anybody or hurt anybody, and it pisses me off to see people out there like you shouldn't compromise your art for the SJWs. And it's like, shut up, idiot. Like,
well, if as an artist your work isn't having the effect you intended it to have,
yeah,
and you want to change it, that's your prerogative.
Yeah, that's like the biggest thing is that like, yo, if I'm an artist and I make something and it doesn't land the way I want it to, or just like people don't like it and I have a way to change it so that people might like it better, that's it. It's still my art. Like, I'm making the choice to change it. I'm not taking it off the marketplace. I'm not, cowering to any idealism. So it just, yeah, whatever. Idiots are gonna say all that shit every time.
I guess I would kind of maybe to help like people wrap their heads around it a little bit easier. I would compare it to like stand up. Like, you go out and you give some stand up, and people either laugh or they don't. And when they don't laugh, you don't go, well, you're just too stupid to get the joke. You go and rewrite your stand-up to get the desired effect, which is people to laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's a perfect analogy, I feel like.
So you're like I came to you and I was like, hey, which games would you like to come on this podcast and do? And you gave me several, and one of them being Deadly Premonition. Why do you think that this game is one of the best games, period?
It's a game and I think the more anybody gets into working critically in the game industry, the more you see that there's no real, like, there are games that you can recommend, like this is one of my favorite games, but there's no, like, top 5 games, period, because it changes from person to person.
Wait, there's no top 5 best games, period?
I mean,
you mean I can have 150 plus games that are best?
Well, I mean, there are 5 games that are the best, but everybody knows them, so they're not worth. It's Tetris, Super Mario Brothers 3, Godzilla Destroy All Monsters on PlayStation 2, No One Can Stop Mr. Domino, and Playboy the Mansion on the Xbox. And then after that, everything is just kind of B Squad. But it's one of those things where it hit me at the right time, and it really, I always credit that Red Dead Redemption and Metal Gear Solid 3 as being the kind of games that inspired me to want to go into game development, to really look at games critically as an artistic medium, because of the way those stories affected me, and really examining, like, despite being silly or janky or, really just goofy at times, why it resonated with me so much. And it's a game that I think the Twin Peaks analogy, a little overplayed, but pretty justified in that it's not a game for everybody. Like, it's not a game I wouldn't recommend a lot of people play it. Like, if you aren't willing to kind of put in a little bit of legwork, meet a game halfway, deal with some, like, boredom, like legitimate boredom, it might not be your cup of tea. But I think it's in the same quadrant as a lot of like The Last Guardian or Shadow of the Colossus, where there are moments of you're just going to be riding a horse around a field for a little bit, or you're going to be you're going to be yelling at the giant bird dog for like 20 minutes. Just like that, you're going to be driving from one edge of town to the other without stopping and listening
and it's scaled appropriately.
Yeah, and it's scaled appropriately, and you're going to be listening to York talk to himself about, the cast of the Killer Tomatoes. And yeah, you do have to deal with some of that stuff, but ultimately it's part of the experience, and it really makes those big moment payoffs much more. It's like waiting for a delicious steak,
Would you might not recommend everybody play it. Would you still take the step that you think everyone should try to play it? Oh,
absolutely. Yeah, it's the kind of game that you might not even know that you love it. It's, because you can look at like a Call of Duty game and be like, I played Battlefield, wasn't for me. And I'd be like, yeah, fair. They're not exactly the same, but you're not a fan of first-person shooters or whatever. You can look at a Street Fighter game, and if you've played Mortal Kombat, you're like, I don't like 2D fighting games. Totally get it. There's still nothing else quite like Deadly Premonition. You can say it's an open world game, you can say it's a horror game, but if you are like, I didn't really dig Silent Hill 3, this isn't anywhere near that. But at the same time, if you're like, I really wasn't feeling Grand Theft Auto, this also isn't really near that either. It's a wholly unique beast. There's nothing else like it.
Yeah, and it just occurs to me, we've been talking about this game for like an hour now, but I don't think we've actually talked about what it's about at all.
Yeah, it's and I think
you want to dive into that?
Yeah, it does start off very similar to Twin Peaks, where you are a federal agent going to a small town. It's actually modeled after the same small town Twin Peaks was shot in, Snohomish in Washington. And I actually went there last year before the world was shut down in a pandemic. And fun fact, the Milk Barn is based on a real place.
Really?
Yeah, a real place called the Milk Barn. So I took a picture out front of the Milk Barn while I was playing Deadly Premonition on the Switch at the Milk Barn. So that was a fun thing. And then it also has the kind of A&G diner is based off of the same Twin Peaks diner. It's actually wild because the area that the diner is in Snohomish, most of the town isn't super similar, but the corner of the street of the diner and like the buildings surrounding it are basically 100% faithfully recreated in the game.
That must have been bizarre standing there playing.
And they're not necessarily in terms of what's outside. It's just basically kind of the shape of the buildings and how the streets move. Mm-hmm. But it was kind of weird to see, to like literally walk around there and then be walking around there in the game. It was cool though. It was fun.
Yeah.
But you start out as a small town FBI investigation. Somebody's been murdered with a connection to a past case. And you know, there is a anagram as the kind of Laura Palmer analog. And you have a quirky FBI agent who loves his coffee, who is a little bit eccentric, who doesn't quite mesh with the local police department. And from there, it gets, like, it really does start very Twin Peaksy. But from there, it goes so many places that, like, it goes just way, way out of left field. Especially when you get towards the end. It almost, like, kind of tricks you by being a Twin Peaks homage in the beginning, because you feel like, okay, I know what I'm expecting. I know who these characters are. I'm familiar with the setup. And then it just does a complete 180 on everything you know about these characters. And
yeah. Well, and layered all over, like, this narrative are also just interspersed these segments with like, it's not exactly clear if it's real or if it's like a mindscape or what.
Yeah,
but these intrusions of, like, weird psychotic zombie creatures. And
yeah, there's a heavy Lynchian surrealism to a lot of it. And, you know, there are these moments in this kind of red room with leaves falling down all around you, and there's the repeated motifs of leaves and trees and branches and growth. It's a game with a lot to unpack under the surface if you want to look there, and I think it just kind of the uncanny qualities kind of sell a lot of the surrealism and horror a little bit better than if they were, you know, really well polished moments, because it adds this dreamlike quality to it all, where you recognize everything, or you recognize the pieces, but the way they're put together just kind of looks strange.
Yeah. That's a good way of kind of getting it across. And I think it's intentional in that way. Like, this is going to sound kind of dumb, I guess, maybe, but it's kind of a broken yet functional game about a broken yet functional man.
It very much is, and as I played it through again on Nintendo Switch when the Origins version dropped last year, and it really occurred to me, like, there's a lot of symbolism in the game with scars, like literal injuries for kind of a couple main characters have injuries from past conflicts. And in a way, it turns into a reflection on how we choose to let trauma define us, and whether it's a negative force or a positive force. and how we choose to let the kind of circumstances around us define our actions. And there's some beautiful messages to the game. There really are, and I think that's what people who love the game really take away from it, more than just it being charming and janky and ambitious, is that there's a very human narrative to it all.
Yeah, I think that is a good kind of place to end our discussion. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, I think we about covered it. I think it's a game, and I cannot tell you how just flabbergasted I was when they announced that they were re-releasing it on Nintendo Switch, but then releasing a sequel. And even though I haven't quite fallen in love with the sequel yet, and I hope it does improve over time, I'm so glad people are getting to dive into this world, get to know these characters, and experience this game. And I hope it comes to modern consoles in the future.
Yeah.
There's nothing really that I've read that says it's like a licensing deal for Nintendo Switch exclusivity. That might just be the publisher trying to get as many eyeballs as they can. But I'd like it to see an even bigger audience, because it definitely deserves it. It's a cult classic for a reason.
Agreed. And is the Nintendo Switch the best way to play this game? Or is it better to go back to the original? I haven't played it on Switch, so I don't know if they have added content or anything on the Switch version.
They don't. In fact, they took out some stuff from the PS3 version. It's weird. So it's kind of a mishmash of some UI and some new stuff from PS3, but also some stuff from the original version. I think the Switch version is suitably fine. They've updated it a little bit to help with some frame rate issues in the open world. It's still not the best running game you're ever going to find. If you have the ability, I would play it on Xbox One, actually, because the frame rate is the best there. Even if some of the difficulty spikes are a little bit harder to deal with on the original version, I think it's the best presentation-wise.
Okay. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for joining us this week. Where can people find you on the internet?
Oh boy, you can find me at bad_Durandal on Twitter, and then sign up on everything for Just Add Monsters. It's at Add Monsters on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and then Just Add Monsters on YouTube. We are almost at 500 subscribers, so I'm very, very excited to reach that goal.
Yeah, definitely check out Just Add Monsters. I've been on a couple episodes with you guys. It's been very fun. I hope to be on more in the future. And as for that, you can find this show, The Best Games Period, over on Twitter at Best Games Period, and you can also find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/Best Games Period. And yeah, go over there, throw us $1 or more per month, and that helps us keep the show going and cover our hosting costs and all that good stuff. So do that, and we should have more shows coming in the future. And again, thank you, Jordan, so much. It's been wonderful having you here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's always nice sitting down and talking with you.